And by a couple, I mean about a minute. All right, Joel, welcome to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. So great to have you here today.
Thank you, Scott. It's my pleasure.
So we are talking about your book, The Language of Leadership, today. And I'm sure probably other things that will pop out from the questions I have for you. But let's dive in. Let's go hard. So I actually, by the way, thank you for a copy. First off,
you're welcome.
Appreciate it. A great read. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And a quick read, I hope.
Yeah, no, it was. It was actually. I read it while I was away on a work trip, and it took me no time whatsoever because I had lots of time in the evenings to myself. Well, I really like the subtitle, How to Engage and Inspire Your Team. So let's dive down that route first. And how and why is that so important? As my son shows up.
Right.
Anyway, why is engaging and inspiring your team so important, and why is communication so effective for it?
Sure. Well, one thing your son would know, as well as you know, that the way we perceive our leaders and the way we understand our colleagues is not because of telepathy, is not because they perform mime. Our leaders don't do performance dance. They communicate. And that's how we experience them. You know, you could throw a rock in a bookstore and you'll get a bunch of books on how leaders need to be this or that: authentic, transparent, compassionate, dedicated. But how do their employees and their staff and their colleagues appreciate that? How do they recognize that? It's through communication. And the book I wrote in 2017 called Get to the Point talked about how to make a point, make an effective point. With this book, The Language of Leadership, I wanted to take that world of leadership. And by the way, that means you're a CEO or you want to be a CEO. You're running a corporation or you're running a meeting. Anyone who needs to exhibit sort of leadership qualities, how can they use language and their voice to engage and inspire? And when I talk about language, I'm talking not just about speeches. I'm talking about podcasts and videos and texting and posting, tweeting, all the ways leaders are perceived through communication by their staff. And the only other thing I want to say about it is I chose those two words in particular: engage and inspire, because there are other words we ascribe to great leaders. They're funny, they're knowledgeable, they're charismatic, they're attractive, they're interesting. But if there are two words I think most bring leaders to the impact they want, it's that. They want to engage their team and they want to inspire their team. Those are the 1-2 punches, I think, of leadership communications.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And that engagement and inspiration is truly what drives a team forward. And here at the podcast, we're all about achieving peak performance, right? And I talk about the 3 domains of leadership, and that is leading yourself, leading your team, which is more where we're at right now, and then as well leading your organization, that institution. And you know, the engagement and inspiration goes from your team and bleeds into your organization. Yet we see so many examples out there of how quote unquote leaders just crash and burn, fail epically in their communication style, in the language that they use, in the actions, their conduct, etc. So, why and where are they're making their mistakes here? And, what are some of the, the major pitfalls that leaders listening there right here, right now can go, okay, this is something I need to avoid. I need to avoid this.
So I like to break it down. My books, as we talked about, they're short. They're not big philosophies. They're really about nuts and bolts, a lot of do's and don'ts, a lot of tricks, a lot of exercises, a lot of tactics. So here's one that gets to one of the big problems that leaders have when they use communications. And that is that they start with the wrong question. The wrong question is, what can I say? What do I need to say? What do I want to tell my team? This is the wrong question, because what is that action? That's putting words out there as if no one is there to receive those words. The ball game is how your team perceives your words, receives your words and what they do as a result of what you say. So it's not about you saying it, it's about them receiving it. So if the wrong question is, what can I say or what should I say? The right question is, what does my audience, my team, my employees, what do they want and need to know? Now, those are two separate things, because what they want to know is usually something they're already aware of. We want to know how we're going to move forward. We want to know what this reorg will mean for my job. But the second, what I need to know, may be something they're unaware of, that the leader needs to tap into and understand, so it's communicated effectively. Once you understand what your team wants and needs to know, then you work backwards. And then you figure out, through my speech or my post or my video, how do I reach that goal of attacking, or at least addressing, that need and that want? So now you have a goal, right? Versus just a blank canvas. What am I going to say?
Yeah, no, you always got to start with, your audience and what is it they, why is it they need to know? And I really like that aspect of the right question, right? Because often I talk about here at the podcast is that us as leaders, we're all about questions, not necessarily answers. So I feel like in a communication aspect, if you're a person who's all about the answers, well, you just go out there and you start blabbing off, and you're like, well, this is what they want to know. Whereas you're like thinking, well, just telling them what they want to know, vice going, okay, actually sitting there and thinking about, okay, what is it that they need to know, want to know, should know with this current situation? Right.
And if you answer yes to this question, your different audiences need to hear different things. If the answer to that question is yes, then the approach is all about your audience, not about you. Because if it's about you, you would say the same thing to everybody. But knowing your audience, your team, one could be just the 5 people in the executive leadership team. The other could be the rank and file of your full organization. Those could be 2 different messages. So it's just another reason to focus on your audience and not yourself.
Now, that actually brings me up to a question here in my mind is, you make a very great point, is that certain audiences require a certain style and they require a certain language. So for example, speaking to the board would not be, you wouldn't use the same type of tone, language, et cetera, as if you're speaking to, the shop floor group of men and women who are working. So absolutely. How can leaders go about gauging that, and especially in that middle zone where it gets kind of a little murky, a little gray? Where should they fall towards regarding their tone, their approach, and et cetera, for communicating with their team?
You remind me of a story. I worked with a CEO, and she had just become a CEO, and she had delivered a proposal to the board of directors, and they thought, this is great, please be our CEO. And then she had to give a speech to people who worked in one of the facilities, who had to deal with a lot of stresses because they were rebuilding the facilities, and there was a lot of work going on there. And her job there was really to tell them, thank you for putting up with all this and inspiring them. Well, she thought, well, if my PowerPoint to the board bowled them over, surely these people will also respond just as well to my PowerPoint that I gave to the board with all the data and the vision. And I'll tell you something, Scott, all that group wanted to hear, the rank and file who were in the building, was, thank you for your patience. Have we been in reconstruction? I think what we did here in your building is going to help you be more productive and keep me informed about how it is. That's all they wanted. Thanks and inspiration. Instead, they got this 5-point PowerPoint. All right, so how do we understand what to do for that audience? How do we know an audience? And there are several answers to that question, one of which is you can survey that audience ahead of time. Leaders often work in teams, internal communications, HR, what's sometimes called people teams. Run some surveys. Use some people who work there. Pick out some people who are leadership or sub-leadership in that group. Say, what's going on there? What do they want to hear from leadership? What do they need to hear from leadership? So it's not guessing as if it'll come to me, what that audience needs to hear. Do the work. Ask people what they most want to hear, what they most want to know. Tap into what individual people are talking about. And, I know some CEOs who do things like breakfast or lunch with the CEO. There are actual programs where they can hear on an ongoing basis what's going on. Because the truth is, and Scott, you were getting to this, you can't match what that team wants and needs to know unless you know what they want and need to know. Because it's, leadership is not about guesswork. The same way you would rely on data to make a strong point about what to do in the fourth quarter, you need information to make the right decision about how to match your communication to the wants and needs of that community.
That's awesome. And you know what? I think this is a great point to throw out a very tactical tip for the leaders out there, especially all the new leaders, because there's a whole lot of new leaders listening to this show. This is why you get off your butt and you get out of your
and
office
listen.
and
Right.
you walk around and you talk to your people, and in turn you listen to what
Right.
they have to say, because that will give you that feel like, okay, this is the type of information that they're seeking, because they're going to be telling you what they're missing, their problem points, their pain points, and they're
Right.
going to be asking you, what's the way forward for the next 6 months?
Right. And by the way,
what's going on with this?
when a leader goes on a listening tour, something else very positive happens. The people you're talking to see you as someone who not only listens, but appreciates the points of view of your people. What could be more inspiring than that, than knowing that your boss is paying close attention to what you're doing so they can respond to it? And so it's sort of a bonus when a leadership takes the time to ask questions, to listen. They send the message that they care about what their team is doing and the point of view of that team.
Absolutely. And I believe firmly that people, team members believing that the leader thinks that their opinion matters, and the leader cares about them is truly what's going to drive everything forward.
Right. It builds trust. It builds authenticity. And those are two important qualities, trust and authenticity. Because if you want them to follow you toward a vision, they have to trust you and they have to believe you. That's trust and authenticity. And there are ways through the language of leadership that you can build authenticity and show vision and show empathy. And I keep harping on the ways to do this, because you can tell a leader, hey, you know what, you should be more authentic. Or you know what, you should be more empathic. Well, what do you do with that? Do they have to seek out psychotherapy? How do I become more empathic? Or at least how do I communicate to others that I am empathic? And that's the key. What are the tactics, the mindsets, and even the words that say, I'm empathic, I'm listening to you, I'm going to try to get in your shoes to understand this problem?
You're literally basically taking the question out of my mouth here. So how do leaders go about coming across as more empathetic or more authentic to their group when they're trying to converse their message to them?
I would say there are 3 steps. And again, I like to build very clear recommendations. I call them acknowledge, care, and action. The first step is acknowledge. You don't need to solve people's problems. And Scott, sometimes teams don't need their leaders to solve their problems so much as acknowledge that there is a problem. And putting a message out there to leaders, it's easier to acknowledge than to solve. I think everyone can agree with that. So what does acknowledge sound like? I recognize this is an anxious time for all of us. I see the pain we're going through, or I see the individual challenges you have working in this environment. That's acknowledge. Number 2 is care. I care about the stress level, the work-life balance, your sense of safety and stability. Now, number 3 is action. We don't always associate action with empathy, but in terms of the language of leadership, I think people are looking for it as the final step. And again, this isn't necessarily, here's the 3-step process we're going to bring in to solve your problem. But we're going to take a hard look at this by forming committees. We're going to bring in outside consultants. We're going to start with the first level of policies to really understand the issue so we can take the right step, not the wrong step, to solve that problem. So acknowledge, care, and action. If leaders illustrate that through their words and through their voice, people will understand that that leader is empathic.
I really like that, especially the last part, the action part, because I think nothing destroys authenticity than someone who says, oh, yes, I understand you. Yes, I feel for you. Yes, we need to do something about it. And then
And
nothing.
then, right, and then nothing. It's right. It's a promise that's not followed up on. And by the way, Scott, language of leadership is also about words, and I want to share two magic words when it comes to empathy, and it's this: rest assured. There's something magical when leaders say rest assured. It conveys hope, which is another thing I talk about, how to convey hope. But it says to people somewhat magically, because it's only two words, this is going to get done. It's almost a code for that. So I'm not saying you just say, rest assured, we're going to get there. Put emphasis and put actual ideas on the table. But I recommend using those words because the words rest assured are instantly reassuring.
Rest assured, podcast listeners, rest assured.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I love it. Now, you've hit it earlier about, the times we're living in, and we talked about it just before we hit record. And I think we would be remiss to not discuss, the challenges that leaders have in this day and age and have had in the past, going on 2 years now,
mm-hmm.
of really working in that virtual environment almost solely, right? And I hear it all the time from leaders. Well, it's not the same as being at work, not the same as being face to face. The communication is not there. Can't read the body language and can't feel the pulse of the room, et cetera. All these different, I'm going to call them, I'm going to call a spade excuses here on not, getting the sense of how their people are doing, et cetera, and communicating with them properly. So from your standpoint, what are the best practices in this virtual environment now for leaders out there to ensure that they remain engaged with their people, they inspire their people, remain connected with them, and pushing, their mission forward?
Well, I don't like to fall into this well of isms, but there is an ism here, and it's called Zoom fatigue. And you can Google it, and what Zoom fatigue basically says, and there have been some shallow studies on it, let's say that, but they are saying that it's stressful that your body and your home and you're wearing pajamas or whatever, your kids, everything says at home, relax. You might as well be watching television, but your mind is at work and you're in a meeting. Those two things are stressful because they're working against each other. I'm at home. No, I'm at my meeting. So one of the things I try to encourage people to think is when you're at work, try to physically be at work. Wear something that you would wear to a meeting. Show a background that supports the idea that you are making points related to your subject matter or whatever business you're in. For example, a lot of people have bookshelves behind them. That says, hey, you're reading, you're smart, or just there's something neutral back there. I do a lot of work in animal welfare sometimes. So it's not why I have this picture up here, but it's why I didn't take it down. This picture of a dog on a bed. So just recognize that you need to do everything possible to clear yourself of distractions, especially if you have a second screen, turn it off or put nothing on it. If you have a phone, turn it over. Remove every kind of distraction that you have. And people know that, when you go to a regular meeting in a real room, not a Zoom, we know not to check our email at the same time. Well, it's even harder on Zoom because there are so many more things distracting us. Now, let's talk about some real brass tacks. Let's talk about framing. So we've seen enough Zoom meetings where someone is back here, or their head is cut off, or they're all the way on the side, and they can see themselves. So there's no reason to do that. It means they don't care. They think it doesn't matter, as if it's audio, even though everyone can see each other. But just like when you're giving a speech, you would want everything to come from your head and shoulders. In Zoom too, you want to fill it up with your head and your shoulders as much as possible without cutting anything off. Too far back, and you're creating distance between you and your audience. Too far to the side, and everyone's looking here at the middle instead of at your face forward. The last thing I want to say that's really important is eye contact. In a Zoom is completely different than eye contact in a meeting. So in Zoom, we want to look at people's faces because that's what we do in real life. I call it the Brady Bunch grid, and that makes sense. But as I'm looking at you now, Scott, and I'm going to describe this for the people who are just listening, You are not seeing me looking at you. You're seeing me looking off center. That's because that's not where my camera is. My camera is here and I'm pointing to it right now. So the general rule is when you're coming around to a very big point, this approach is going to save lives. This idea is going to help us sell more Coca-Cola. Deliver that point right into the camera, because you know from just giving speeches, eye contact is critical. Well, on Zoom, eye contact means looking into the camera, not into the Brady Bunch grid.
Yeah, no, that last point is just crucial. It's so actually so hard to do, and
it is difficult, yeah, because it's a cold black dot. Yeah,
exactly. You're just looking into this random little box that's
right.
hooked on the top of my monitor here. Although I see you at the periphery of my eye, but you're right though, because that's how it comes across to the listener, and that's what matters the most.
Right. And so how can we help people look to the camera? One thing I always say is if you have a Zoom screen or you have notes, push that as high up on your monitor as possible so that between your camera and your notes, your camera and your PowerPoint, you're only moving your eyes. This is the rule of thumb. Have them close enough to where you're only moving your eyes to move from camera to PowerPoint or camera to notes, not moving your head or your neck as if watching a tennis game. Because looking away, you're breaking a connection with that audience. And by the way, when you're in a Zoom meeting, guess what? You don't really need to look at yourself. And guess what? You don't even really need to look at everyone else. Sometimes that'll throw you off. When someone in your audience is looking to the side, you may think, oh, they're bored with me. But actually, the puppy in their room is doing something distracting. That's why they're looking. It has nothing to do with you as a presenter. So something I always say to the CEOs, if you have notes or you have a PowerPoint, go ahead and cover the Zoom screen with that. Nobody's going to miss you not looking at the Brady Bunch because they don't know you're not looking at the Brady Bunch. In so doing, you have two things to look at and two things only, your camera and your notes, camera and your notes. Then present into the camera and it'll have the ultimate impact, even though you never looked at yourself or your audience.
Where does having someone help you with your speech or your presentation come into play? So I liked what you talked about, i.e. covering up the screen with your notes or your presentation, not necessarily looking at the Brady Bunch as you like to say it. Well, someone might be there like, hello, question, but you're not seeing them obviously because one, you got the video covered, and two, they're muted, so you don't see them with their hand up. So
by and large,
how do you get around that?
Yeah, in a Zoom meeting, by and large, you set the rules ahead of time. I'm going to take Q&A afterwards, or please put any questions in the chat. Then you could have the chat screen moved to the side so you can keep an eye on that. But in the very sophisticated meetings, other people may be watching the chat for you, recording those questions so that in the 5 or 10 minutes you have Q&A at the end, that person can say, all right, this question came in from chat earlier. You have someone actually looking through those questions to create a sort of room of questions that they can ask you. So set the stages of that Zoom meeting so that things are happening when you mean for them to. Now, if you do set up an environment where you say, anyone who wants to raise their hand, I'll call on you, then obviously you need to look at the Zoom screen. But people don't always use chat so strategically. They think of chat as sort of like an open mic. All right, well, someone might say something goofy or talk about whatever, or they'll ask an open question. So what do you think about that? What is someone going to say? Use chat strategically. All right, in chat, if you liked idea 1, please type in 1. If you liked idea 2, please type in 2, or ask a very specific question. I want everyone to write one word that is your response to the video we just watched. Or I want everyone to type into chat one thing they're really proud of that they did in the last month or 2 months during this time of COVID. See, I'm asking a very specific question. So I'm going to get specific answers in the chat, and I'm going to use the chat strategically, not just randomly. And by the way, another quick tip, Scott, and I can't take credit for this. I pulled it from another conference I went to, but I don't know who was speaking. 7 seconds. You know what 7 seconds is? 7 seconds is the amount of time you should wait for chat feedback in a Zoom meeting. Turns out it's another magical thing. We don't have statistics behind this, but if you stick with me, 6 seconds, you're cutting it off too early, and someone was going to ask something or pose something or contribute something they didn't get a chance to. So don't go 6 seconds, but 8 seconds. If you're waiting 8 seconds for a response, that's when it becomes excruciating silence. And somehow someone suggested, and I've done this a lot of times enough to believe it, I'm a believer, you count 7 seconds. So does anybody else have any questions? Or did anyone else want to give feedback? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, we're going to move on to our next topic. Magic.
That's awesome. And I feel you highlight two, I wouldn't say, it's basically two problem areas that leaders are pretty weak in right now. One, strategic use of the chat. I think this is somewhere where we need to get better. Leaders need to get better. You see it really good with people in online sales. These webinar folks, like, hey, where are you calling in from?
Right,
throw it in the chat, and then they'll start doing shout outs. And what they're doing, they're engaging with their audience.
Right. Thanks, Sally. I agree with you, blah, blah, blah. Or look what Steve said. That's a wonderful technique to call out things that came through the chat, identify the person, acknowledge them, and to show other people that you want to engage. And that engaging will make the Zoom meeting even more effective.
Yeah, and then the second thing, that 7 second rule, I'm definitely going to throw that one in my back pocket, because that's no, it makes total sense. It's crazy to think that 1 second makes that big of a difference, but in this world, it definitely does. So you need to provide that space, because sometimes people are fumbling. About 10 minutes ago, I was fumbling with my mic for some reason, wasn't unmuting, and you might be in that similar situation. So if you only give them 4 seconds or 5 seconds, there's not enough time for them to fix the problem. But 7, definitely enough time for people to
10 is, and we've all been in meetings where someone says anything else, and you get crickets, and it starts to get really awkward. And by the way, you should never do one of these two things, which is, one is beg for questions. Come on, doesn't anyone have any questions? Come on, someone must have a question. I mean, that's shaming, and you never want to shame your people. And the other is sort of chastising people. I can't believe there are no questions. Really, how can it possibly be? That's also shaming. So use the 7 second rule. Ask for it, count to 7 seconds, move on.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, I like your last 2 points there about the shaming and chastising, because ultimately, this is how I take those scenarios. I've explained myself well enough that all the questions that people may have had were answered in my, my presentation, my briefing, my speech, whatever. So, all right, let's move on.
Yeah, that may be the case.
Let's not waste people's time. Let's move on.
Right.
So, Joel, this has been fantastic. Now, I'd like to throw a few different scenarios at you.
Sure.
And get your advice for the leaders out there. And these are scenarios which leaders find themselves in a consistent, I wouldn't say constant, but very consistent basis. So the first one is, you got to break the bad news. Maybe that is you got to fire somebody. Maybe profits are down. Maybe there's going to be layoffs. Who knows? But that bad news. So what's your advice to leaders out there in relaying that bad news to their people?
Right. Well, it's true. Often you're going to need to share some bad news. And the first thing you want to do is find a way to insert hope. Because imagine that you are a captain on a ship and it's taking on water. Do the people really want to hear more about how high the water is rising, or how low the ship is sinking, or what our chances of drowning are? No, they don't want to hear more of that, but they want to hear how we're going to get out of this, or at least what we're going to do next. So I always say insert hope. And one of the tricks or tactics that I recommend with that is to use hope as a noun and not a verb. Because hope as a verb says, well, I hope we'll get through this, or I hope this will be all right. I hope it's not going to rain tomorrow. I hope the Red Sox win, whatever. If you're you're just throwing it out for chance, right? It's out of my control. I hope it'll happen. Who knows? But if you use hope as a noun, then you're saying, this gives me hope that we will weather this and have a better fourth quarter. Or even, I have hope based on the data that we will find a way around this. Now, if you're giving bad news, obviously this is where you want to be authentic. You want to be truthful. You want to be clear. Here's a mistake some leaders make. They sugarcoat it, but psychologically, they're not sugarcoating it because they're afraid of their audience receiving it. They're sugarcoating it because it's easier for them to say something that's a little sugary versus the hard truth. But listen, you're a leader with great responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Isn't that the Spider-Man phrase? So your responsibility is to be truthful, to be clear, not to over-explain, which is something a lot of leaders do. Maybe the more I talk, I'll get people so tired of me that they won't even be bothered anymore. So be clear, be short, be truthful, and try to inject hope as much as you can. That's your job as a leader. And what that means is that's your job to communicate all of those things.
It goes back to, basically the beginning, and we talked about being inspirational and authentic, right? This is where that time where you build that, authentic currency in people believing in you, and you come across, I got hope that we will get through this,
right?
And they'll get inspired. Like, what? The boss doesn't let us down. If he's got hope, we can do this. And that inspiration starts coming out. And it's great. You talked about a story earlier, and I got one myself where I was talking to a former business owner, a CEO of a business, a printing press in 2008. He was telling me about how, all orders dried up instantly, like almost overnight. And he said, no, we will weather this, and we will not lose one person in this process. And that's what he told his team. And he said, there was lots of days we showed up, we did absolutely nothing, but we, cleaned up around the building, and we made sure things were nice, and we got to know each other. And in the end, once the revenue started coming back in, he didn't lose a single one of his employees through that whole thing.
Another tip is something I talk about in the book is I versus we. For the most part, when a leader says I, they're saying something personal. I want us to get through this. I need us to meet our goals. This is important to me. And when a leader says that using I, they may think they're being transparent. But what they're actually doing is putting themselves above their team instead of among their team. What puts you among your team, and that's something you want to communicate, is we. We will get through this. We've never had a challenge like this before, but we will get through this. Because your employees, your staff, your team, they want to know that the leadership is with them, suffering with them, facing challenges with them, and working together with you to overcome the problem.
It's never about you, it's about the team. I always say, us as leaders were the reasons for our team's failures, but the teams are the reason for our successes. So you've got to go that we route for sure.
Right.
All right, so let's talk about let's keep going on this crisis line here, and how and what tips do you have for leaders out there and how they should communicate during a crisis? I think we kind of touched on it, but I definitely want to steer the ship even more in that direction. So what are your advice there for leaders in those crisis situations, such as the 2008 economic downturn, and how they should communicate with their teams?
Sure. Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier was rest assured. Those words have magical power. Let's talk about some more tactics and some more mistakes. So sometimes a leader will say, well, this has been so hard for me and your executive leadership team. We talked for weeks about this. We didn't get any sleep. We were communicating late at night about this. And they think that it demonstrates a leader's commitment to solving the problem. But all it really says is, I had a tough time with this. This was a difficult process for me, but they're not talking about, what you and I were talking about, Scott, which is what are we going through? What are we going through together? The team is not going to care how much this troubles you as the leader. They want to know what we are going to do to get out of it. So don't focus on yourself. Don't try not to focus on things that you fear, you don't know, or that you don't understand. Now, if you don't know something, you should say, I don't know, we will get back to you. But speculation and wondering aloud just creates a very shaky ground. What does anyone want to know during the crisis? The ground is firm under their feet, if only their personal feet, or at least that it's getting firmer. When a leader hedges or speculates or wonders or say maybe this or maybe that, it's making the ground softer. You want to firm up things. So the things you can say clearly, and here's another phrase that helps. Here's what I can say. A very, very useful phrase. Here's what I can say. I know we're facing a tremendous challenge, but here's what I can say. I know that if we work together, because I've seen it before, remember the XYZ project? We can do that again and have success. Or here's what I know, or here's what I've seen. Those are great phrases to say, I have faith in you, and I'm going to tell you, just, apart from what the challenge is, what I know personally in my heart. This is what I've seen, and I'm going to trust this, and you should too, especially if you're saying what I've seen is something you've seen from the team.
This is where humility comes into play, right? You got to
Right.
be pretty humble as a leader in these situations, especially at the times when you get asked questions where you don't know the answer.
Right.
You know what? I don't know right now, but I'll find out for you and I'll get back to you as quick as possible.
Right. And number one is be truthful.
Right.
Don't say half truths. Don't try to sugarcoat it. The number one thing that your team expects from you in a crisis is truth, hard truth, honest truth, and short, concise truth. They want to be able to process it, give them time to process it, and then give them reason to hope.
Well, I would think if you are consistently, dragging things out, stumbling as you talk, that is actually going to give the inverse effect of people thinking, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It feels like he's making it up. He's just, winging it right now. He actually doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. That's got, we got to pull pin and get out of this ship before it sinks.
Right. Exactly. Using that metaphor.
Awesome. So let's flip the coin on the other side there. We talked about, going through the tough times. Let's talk about the good times. We made a big win. We nailed a big account, big contract. Maybe we hit some kind of milestone. Who knows? How can we go about making sure that our people feel that they're a part of that? What are some of the tactics there for the leaders out there?
Right. Let's take a very specific scenario here. I mean, we could talk about we should celebrate, we should bring the team in. These are obvious things. But here's a mistake I see leaders do often, which is very shallow thanks. Sometimes they think that the mere words thank you or thanks is like checking a box called appreciation. But we know from having heard thanks in our lives, it has not a very lasting value or impact. We forget about it an hour later because there was nothing there. Not only was there not substance, but a lot of people get thanks. Why was the thanks that I got unique? So what I encourage leadership to do, whether we're celebrating a big win or whether you're thanking an employee or a team, is to always include the why. I want to celebrate this win, but I also want to acknowledge the hard work of the X team, and the X team, who I know put in extra hours to make sure all of our numbers were correct. Or I want to thank our PR team for making sure that as the media and newspapers covered this, they always covered us positively. So you're always asking yourself, well, why are you thanking them? Number one. Two, how is what they did, this success, how does it impact the overall goal of the organization? So thank you for doing this. It's really making a difference in how we are perceived. And I believe that it is also moving us further toward our goal of, and you should always know what this ends with if you're a leader, saving more lives, preserving the earth, selling more Coca-Cola, selling more product X, improving public health, whatever your big bottom line is, bring it out as an impact of whatever that success is. Because I'll tell you something, Scott, I see a lot of presentations, whether they're leaders or not, that end with, if we do this right, we're going to get more traffic to our website. If we do this right, we're going to build more facilities. If we do this right, we'll get more money through fundraising. And those are never the ultimate goals. If we do this right and get more traffic to our website, what is the so what? As my wife, who's a school teacher, where is the so what there? So more traffic comes to our website, so more people buy our product. So more people are aware of this issue and take action to solve it. Always know what I call your highest value outcome, and specifically articulate that, not just the medium goal.
Oof, I love that. You know, we're doing it because we're saving lives.
Right. What is your saving? Not everyone's saving lives, but everyone has a saving lives. You need to know what yours is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Joel, I don't know how we can actually wrap up this show even better than that. So I think I'm just going to leave it there.
Let's save lives. Yeah.
Seriously. Well, you're talking to a guy who by day is senior Canadian Army officer. So that's where I live. That's where I live.
Right.
So you're hitting me straight to the heart. And
yeah,
actually, I was briefing. I was presenting to a brand new group of officer candidates for my trade. I asked them, I said, what do we do in the military? What's our purpose? And all kinds of answers. And I boiled it down to them, like, we're here to save lives, folks.
Right.
That's what we're here for.
Right.
In a day. So
not to earn medals, but to save lives. Right.
That's right. You got it. Joel, this has been fantastic. Truly appreciate you and your time. Before we wrap up though, I got a couple last questions for you. First being a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. According to you, Joel, what makes a great leader?
A great leader is someone who engages and inspires their team. Now, Scott, I said this at the beginning, we said it through, but I want to make a point here. If you have a big point to make, do not be afraid to say it over and over again, because that's the one thing you want your audience to take away. So what I want audiences to take away, I don't want to break something new out here. I want to reinforce my big takeaway, which is through their voice, whether it's on video or Zoom or a podcast or a post, through their voice, leaders have the ability to engage and inspire their teams if they choose the right words, mindsets, and tactics.
Love it. Love it. And the final question of the show is, where can people find you? How can they follow you, be part of your journey? It's all about you right now.
Sure. Well, I'd love for them to follow me on Twitter. And my Twitter is the Joel Truth. Sometimes the people in IT enjoy when I say, I consider my work open code. That is, I like to share everything I know. So I share it there. But if you want to go to my platform, if you want to learn about both books, Get to the Point in the Language of Leadership, go to www.joelschwartzberg.net. That's JoelSchwartzberg.net. JoelSchwartzberg.net. You could find my podcasts. I write articles for Fast Company and Harvard Business Review. You could see them there. My joy is in sharing these ideas. So everybody we don't compete with each other in leadership all the time. So I want everybody, all leaders and all emerging leaders, to be in the best position to champion their most important points.
Absolutely. And you know what? For you, the listener, it's easy. As always, go to movingforleadership.com/192 and the links are in the show notes. To my friend, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule. Truly appreciate you and everything you have to do.
Thank you, Scott. It's my pleasure, and I appreciate you as well.